I just heard this expression called the bottom of Twitter, and it made me think about like the bottom of the sea or like the depths of space. And you think about it, people these days can go on the internet and they could watch videos all day, or they could sit on their phone and they could just be on that thing and scroll all the time with no end. And it's produced a different type of person because you consider the amount of content on the internet, the amount of replicated MP4 files, if you will, or MP3 files if it's music, but the sheer volume of replicated images and video and sound and people looking at their phones and seeing all these different faces and hearing all these different things, it's produced a completely different type of person than we had previously in previous generations. Decade to decade, the amount of information that's recorded and available for people. And the other thing about it is that the average survey of this information, like people are all under the impression that when they watch a video that has 1 million views, that a lot of people have seen it, but it's different now. It's like back in 2008 or 2009 when I was in high school, we had Gangnam Style, right? We had this video. You probably haven't even seen it because it's like, who would watch this like video that went viral back then? But this thing got like 100 million views on one video on YouTube, which is pretty common now. But back then, back in 2008 when this happened, I mean that was huge in my school, and now it's just some like corny song from back in like a bygone era. But we thought like 100 million views back then was like really something, and it still has that impression. I remember I was talking about this thing called the myth of the viral video, or like the mythology of the viral video, but I mean it goes deeper than that. It goes a lot deeper than that because it's sort of like algorithm mentality or like algorithm ideology, because it's like based on locality and sort of all these different extrasensory digital or lack thereof, or some sort of overlap. And you look at the way that people interact with their phones, and then they're under the impression that the information that they're engaging with is known, or that people around them are under the same spell. But it's rarely the case nowadays that people are all looking at the same crap on their phones. So the more people or families or whatever detach themselves from cable and start watching different content on their phones and observing different, and having different interpersonal relationships with people in the digital world, I mean, that is a totally different landscape than the previous generations had. And even our generation, the millennials, didn't necessarily, because we still had cable. We all still knew what was on the news, and we were getting our weather from the same place, and we generally then we had Twitter. And then what happened was we had this like short content, or Instagram namely, and a lot of these other ones that have the scroll until you never reach the bottom. So here comes the expression, the bottom of Twitter. You never reach the bottom of Twitter. It's endless. It's endless information, and we're in a we're really saturated. I guess the word is saturated, and there's no real end in sight to the amount of saturation of information. And I think at a certain point, a decision was made a long time ago that there's really no there's no point in trying to limit information. It's more so bottleneck it in certain points, and then allow an overpopulation of information. Because you have people watching all different sections of the same video millions of times. Like people watching 15 seconds of a 1 hour video or some people have watched the entire thing, or people have watched the first minute, and 1 million people have watched the first minute, but nobody's watched the second minute. Nobody's watched the second minute. A million people have watched the first minute, but 0 people have watched the second minute. And then the person who created it's under the impression that all these people who spent like 10 1 million people spent 10 seconds each watching 1 minute of a 2 minute video, and the second minute was never viewed by anybody except for the person who made it. The person who was only in the second half of it, or the person who was just there, is then in the picture with the person who is the subject matter of the video, but it was only popular because of the song that was on it, and then the person who was in it thinks that he got is in a million view video. It's like strange because nowadays, like, everybody's under the impression that when a piece of content is uploaded to the internet, that then everybody who's in proximity to that somehow is some sort of a beneficiary of it, or a lack thereof. In irrespective of content integrity, more so to them, it might only necessarily have the impression of a certain degree of. I believe the term that's used by corporations and such nowadays is social proof. That's what businesses need or whatever nowadays. Social proof, but I don't know. It almost amounts to social trickery in my mind. I think when you consider people and their need to be liked online, or their need to be validated in the digital sphere. I don't know. I think about these things. I just think about, like, people upload something to Facebook and they want to have an impression that, or maybe they like want to relive their vacation or some crap. Like, they post it onto Facebook and then they have it's well understood that they have like a dopamine rush, or people get a dopamine hit from when they post something on social media. They're not making money posting it on social media, so what then is it for? Or what earns the degree of involvement because people's time, your time is the most valuable thing you have. I mean, people complain about having to go to work and stuff because that's a waste of their time, but then they go home and they spend a lot of time they spend time on their phones. They spend time doing things that waste time, especially sitting there watching. I mean, watching commercials is a big one. Or watching commercials is one that I have to bring up, because it's like, oh yeah, you watch commercial, you're like, okay, you just spent how much time watching a commercial? It's like you spent a lot of time watching a damn commercial. I think about that because you understand, like, how much, like, valuable information you could get your hands on in 1 minute. Like, you go on Google and you can get information in 1 minute. It splits. People split. There's a split now. I'm like, it's hard to put your finger on the point of like what, or it's hard for me to exactly illustrate the point that the type of person that I'm trying to talk about here, because it's like there's a type of person who will go onto their phone and have to look up what you're talking about, and they'll pull up a link in conversation, like in real life. They'll have to pull out their phone and show you something on their phone, and this isn't always inappropriate. It's not always inappropriate to like pull out your phone and show something to somebody. It could be cool when properly prompted, and is, but it's also can be desperately uncool for somebody to want you to, particularly when somebody maybe, I don't know, it's like, it's tough to even illustrate the point because I need like a better example, but it's like, yeah, it often happens with like old people, I think, but I don't want to pick on them because it could really be anybody. It's like a phenomenon where somebody doesn't really get it. It's like they don't really understand what it is. It's like if I'm sitting there and I'm talking to somebody, or if I'm hanging out with a buddy, and I don't want to be looking at a phone. Like, you could send me a link, or you could like show me a song, or like show me something, or like I'll follow you on Instagram or something like that. But like, there's a limit. Like when somebody hands me their phone and tells me to read it, and like has me open up a link on their phone and wants me to like read something and like really sit there and read something, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why don't you just tell me what it is on this information that needs to be told? And they like don't want to tell you it. I don't know, you ever meet someone like that? Like, they're like, oh yeah, like I don't necessarily, like, they're like, I won't tell you what I want you to look up on this information. It's written down right here. It's like a lot of the time it's people who don't read. Like they don't read anything, and then like the only type of crap that they know how to talk about are like references to Adam Sandler movies, and then they'll sort of shake their head and nod when you're having a conversation with them, but overall you know that none of it was absorbed, or even the integrity of the information wasn't intellectually appreciated. I've been becoming critically aware and very, very, by extension, critical of the people around me in general, because I've noticed a lack of intellectual integrity to information, a sort of like a numbed out, dull nod to, in a sense of generality, when people want to sort of go along to get along, and then nudge you along, but then all at the same time sort of waste your time in the process, but almost for the novelty of ceremony, as opposed to actually listening, or But then at a certain point, it's like then these same people profess to be themselves intellectual and want to like set aside time to be appreciative of ideas or film or some sort of thing. Like sit down and have a time and place to be thinking, as it would then pertain to maybe in and of itself be like an act of what do you call it, jovial, if you're like almost as if like going to Barnes and Noble as if it's like a theme park, and then never going into a real library. Like people who go to Starbucks and Barnes and Noble, but I don't know, because I kind of like those kind of people. Those people have class, they have spirit, and they're enjoying themselves. You gotta kind of appreciate people like that, because they're the ones who keep the books on the shelves. I mean, they're spending all that money on coffee, but that's keeping the lights on at the whatever bones are left over of libraries, because God knows, people who read these days are in a special club. Really, people who actually sit down and read, I don't know, I can't really even illustrate the point. It's just sort of like more of a private thing, because it takes a lot of time to read. Sitting down and reading, and then you think about it, it's like your time is the most valuable thing you have. And it's also interesting to see how people, I don't know, it's like people are so lackluster, and then want to live their lives through the media, and it really does lend itself by extension to that phenomenon of the unending news feed, the availability of so much information. And then it's like, oh, if somebody scrolls past a 15-second video, then that counts as a view, and then that's like an ego boost or whatever. And then the fact that somebody saw their face for a second, it's like, it just seems like bad AI art or something. Well, regardless, I don't have anything else to say. I would talk longer, but I feel like I've overstated. I don't know. Let me know. Peace.